Welcome back. So this is the second part of the sort of intros to emails, presentations, lessons. So what I want to talk about here is a little bit more in depth, a little bit more of the specifics about the anatomy or the architecture of an email, which I think we generally take for granted. So what we're going to be talking about are little bits and pieces, and I think much like writing an essay, we assume that everybody knows the parts of an essay, but that's not necessarily true. And sometimes even going back to the basics is helpful. So there are, in general, 4 basic parts of an email, right? The subject line, the greeting, the body of the email, and the closing, right? And some of these are pretty straightforward and simple, but I am going to give you a couple suggestions on how to make your emails a little bit more streamlined, a little bit more effective to make sure they're getting open, they're getting read, and they're getting responded to, which is, again, kind of the bulk of why we send emails in the first place. So let's just start with what I think is of as a vastly overlooked part of any email. And, maybe some of you think about this, but I'd say a lot of people don't put a lot of care and thought into this, and is the subject line. So if you did the syllabus quiz and you read the syllabus and watched the other videos on just kind of course overview, you know that my preference, my requirement, more or less, for an email for this class is that you include the course, so Business Writing 115, and some sort of short question so that I know what you're focusing on, right? So, for example, I might be teaching 3, 4, 5 classes, some number of classes, and I don't always recognize which class a student is in just based on their name. So when you can say, hey, I'm, Business Writing 115, I automatically go, oh, it's somebody that's in that class. And if you say, question about the weekly quiz, I know, okay, I probably need to respond to this. If it's something like, medical, Business Writing 115 medical emergency. Now I know, okay, I definitely need to read this because the student, may need some extensions or some other sort of considerations. So the subject line is that first thing that somebody sees. They'll see your name and the subject line. And especially in a case where they don't know you or they may not know you, it's very helpful to focus on that subject line. So the subject line in general tells the reader what the email is about. It should be clear and concise, and you should at all costs avoid using all caps, emojis, exclamation points, any sort of clickbait type. Have you ever wondered what the best way is to just get straight to the point? I will say, in terms of clear and concise, and we talked about it in a previous video about kind of the time of the day and other aspects of what's going into an email. And specifically, we talked about the fact that most people are reading emails on a device. On a computer, but especially on a mobile phone, people are only going to see the first 3, 4, 5 words maybe of that subject line. So keep your subject line nice and short, nice and concise. Not only will that make it easier to read on a device, it will also help the reader, the recipient of the email, kind of pick up on what the focus is, and then they can prioritize or triage based on your subject line. So if we go kind of through a little exercise here, good or bad, right? Help, right? That's a bad subject line. I'll just throw that one out there. Help with what? Right? Medical emergency, right? Like if I get an email from my daughter's school from the nurse that says help, I'm going to panic, right? But if it's really like help getting new supplies, that's a different scenario, right? And now I've been unnecessarily forced to panic, and it's going to affect the way that I respond. What do I do? Again, bad. I don't know as a recipient. Do about what? What's the situation? And I do receive student emails like this. And again, I don't know what class they're in. I don't know what they need help figuring out. I don't know if it's a broken link or their computer crashed or their car broke down, whatever. Number 3 is not bad, right? Assistance with marketing. It's in the right sort of vein, but I don't know what sort of assistance they need. Follow up, again, not so good. I don't know a follow up to what, which is why the next one is a little bit better. Meeting follow up. Now, this is kind of a middle ground. It's not really good. It's not really bad. But I would say if we added a word or two in there, it would help clarify. The date, September 25th, meeting, follow up, action items. That makes more sense. We know what meeting, we know what the follow up is concerning. Status update on latest product update for release next week. A little long, a little bit repetitive, a little bit wordy. We could do status report, update for release next week. And again, it would help to say the product. Product release update, that's pretty good. Again, specifics about the product would help, but at least I know, hey, it's a update about the product being released. And then number 8, of course, is not that great because, again, we just have kind of a clickbait sort of scenario. So a couple quick reminders on subject line. And I don't know that I can stress enough how important it is to really think about your subject line carefully. And one good tip for that before I go on to the next slide is to write the subject line last. A couple reasons for that. Number one, you may redraft that email, you may change things, and maybe the focus shifts a little bit. So that's one reason. The other reason is that most email servers, browsers, programs, whatever you want to call them, will give you a little notice if you haven't included a subject line. So if you accidentally hit send, it will prevent you from sending it until you've clicked, yeah, I want to send it without a subject line, which you should never do. Just an email without a subject line is a bad idea. So that, waiting until the end is good for those two reasons. Now, how to write a subject line. Keep it short, right? Place the important information first. Again, only the first 3, 4, 5 words might show up in whatever device they're looking at that email on. Remember that the subject line is intended to let your reader know what the email is about and be clear, concise, and specific. Another really good way to think about subject line is to think about it like the title of a news article, right? If the news article says it's talking about, or the title of the news article says it's about one thing and the article is about something else, that doesn't work. If the title of the article is really long, most people aren't going to read it. You get the gist. All right. So let's get through a couple more things here. So the next thing, again, overlooked, I think, is the greeting. So the greeting is the first couple words of the email. And there are some stylistic things here I went over in a previous video. Whether you say hi or hello or just start with the person's name is up to you. I would say using a full name is good if you don't know the person. Depending on the situation, you could use just a last name. I played sports as a kid. I'm from a military family, so it was pretty common to call people by their last names. That was just a convention. But a first name probably works just fine. Just make sure you're spelling it correctly. I don't know how many times I've gotten emails addressed to Michaela or Mike or something like that, which is not my name or it's not the way I prefer my name. Or if you have a name that's hard to spell, right, you probably have experienced this too. So the greeting helps to establish your connection with the reader, right? It's the first instance where you can say, hey, here's the relationship dynamic or the power dynamic between me and the recipient. So use the recipient's first name generally, if you know them well, or if they have sent you an email signed with their first name. So another pro tip is if you're responding to an email, start your email greeting with however they signed their name. It may be that if Vi here is her, their full name is Violet or Vivian, they may go by Vi. And that's pretty common too. Number 3, use the recipient's title and last name if it's professional, right? Dear Mr. Rodriguez, dear Dr. Rodriguez, whatever it is. Use the position title if you don't have a specific name, right? And some people will say, well, use to whom it may concern. That's okay, but if you can get more specific, that's better, like dear hiring manager. You can, as number 5 says, start the email without a greeting. I would recommend using that only in a couple circumstances. One is it's a longer email chain where you're discussing one topic, right? So we talked a little bit about sometimes you need to start a different email chain for a different topic, even if it's the same person, or somebody that you correspond with regularly. Some of my colleagues who I work with on a regular basis, they will email me without a greeting. That's fine. I know who they are. It's right there in the from box on the email. I personally am not fond of it. I prefer to say hi or even just the person's name so that it sets the tone for the email. It just feels wrong for me to do it any other way. So I'll stop there with those first 2 parts. And as you can see, there's a lot to sort of unpack with like the different components. You know, we're almost 12 minutes in, and all we've really talked about is when and why to send an email, the subject line, and the greeting. But those 2 first parts are what's moving us closer to making sure it gets opened, making sure it gets read. If you open an email and the name is wrong, the spelling is wrong, that's going to set the tone, and it may mean that email doesn't get read. All right. So there we go. Questions, comments, concerns, jokes, memes, recipes. Let me know. Otherwise, I'll talk to you all later.